Very serious story. This one involves the Mormon Church, and it is very messed up. Let me give you some backstory here because you have to understand what the story this week is all about. But to make sense of it, you have to understand what happened in 2017. And in 2017, a woman named Chelsea Goodrich, she was 31 at the time. She had come to terms with the fact that when she was a child, her own father sexually abused her. Horrible situation. She had grown up with that. I'm sure she had suppressed it for a while or didn't really understand what was happening. But obviously, as she grew up, as she was in her 20s, she understood the seriousness of what had happened to her. So now she's 31 and she realizes, like, not only that that was a problem, but it was a problem because her father, one, he was a Mormon bishop, which is a title that they can bestow upon regular people. You don't have to go to special school for that or anything. So he was a Mormon bishop, and yet he did this horrible thing to her. That's messed up. Here's what's also messed up. She knew that he had confessed what he did to another bishop. And now she wanted to get justice against her father. She wanted to take him to court. She wanted him to go to jail for what he had done. So that meant getting the testimony from the bishop who heard that confession. So she wanted to know, would the Mormon Church allow that bishop who heard the confession to testify in court about what her father had told him? Because right there's some proof that he did these things he was being accused of. So it's no longer just a he said, she said story. It's, yeah, she's accusing him of this, but also here's a bishop who heard about it in real time. So Chelsea, when she's 31 in 2017, she through the grapevine, she finds out there's a lawyer for the Mormon Church who might be able to help her. His name is Paul Ridding. So she meets with Ridding. She and her mom and a friend of theirs, like just a guy looking out on her behalf, they meet with Paul Ridding, who is a lawyer for the Mormon Church, and the bishop who heard the confession. The five of them get together and they talk about what has to happen here. And the thing is, one of the things the lawyer for the Mormon Church points out, is that, hey, when you told us your father had did this to you, we responded by kicking him out of the Mormon Church. He was excommunicated from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. That is true. They did kick him out. That meant he's no longer a bishop, which is fine. But also, who cares? I don't care if he's not a part of your club. This guy did something heinous. He committed a crime. We want to see him behind bars. And that's when the lawyer for the church said exactly what you think a lawyer for the Mormon Church would say. He said, well, if your dad confessed to this crime in a confession booth to this other bishop, then it has to stay a secret. We certainly cannot allow this bishop to testify in court about anything he heard through the act of confession. That's something that's in law. The church is protected by what is known as the clergy penitent privilege. That means basically that confessions get to remain a secret no matter how damning those confessions might be. If you tell a priest at a Catholic church or the Mormon church or whatever, I just killed a man in Reno or something, the Mormon bishop cannot just blab about that to police. He's prohibited from doing it. By law, he doesn't have to do it. And the church reminds all these people, yeah, you have to keep it secret. That's the whole point of confession. One thing I haven't mentioned is that this lawyer for the church, that Chelsea thought this guy was on her side, that he would help her out. Poor gullible soul right here. She didn't realize that this lawyer was actually the head of the Mormon Church's risk management division. He didn't just work for the church. He worked for the part of the church whose entire job it is to make sure nothing bad happens to the church. So her mistake was thinking this guy would look out for her safety. That's not his job. His job is to protect the institution. And that probably, the whole fact that the Mormon Church has this infrastructure in place to protect the church and not the people in the church, that may be why her dad confessed to this crime to another bishop. Like, as a fellow bishop, he knew as well as anybody that his secret could never be used against him. And by the way, he also blames Satan for his actions, as if that makes everything better. And here's the sad thing about all this. Because the church would not make that other bishop available to testify in court, the prosecution that was trying to put together a case against Chelsea's father, they said, we don't have enough evidence to work with here. We can't go after him in court. Now it is just like a he said, she said thing. So we have to drop the case against him. So he didn't go to jail because of what he did to his daughter. He didn't suffer in any meaningful way because of what he did to his daughter. In fact, as we speak, he is right now working as a dentist in Idaho. He's just moved on with his life. He's all well and good. So here's the other thing. Maybe this is the silver lining to all this. Chelsea, even though she couldn't go after her father in court, she did go public with what happened to her. And when another woman heard about what Chelsea said about her father, this other woman said, wait a minute, I know that guy. He did the same thing to me. He sexually abused me. In fact, he drugged me, like knocked me out unconscious using a drug that he had access to because he's a dentist. And then he sexually assaulted her, she said. So she went after him too. And if this is not good news because there's nothing good about this story, but they did end up getting a plea deal out of the dad. And basically, for the dad to avoid being charged with a sex crime, which is super serious and would have put him away behind bars for a really long time, he was instead, his plea deal was that he would go to jail for 90 days, 90 days, and do 3 years of probation. Why? Because he illegally used that sedative that he had access to as a dentist. So he decided, I will plead guilty to a drug charge instead of a sex crime charge. And they accepted that, but he still faced no punishment for what he did to that poor woman. And like I said, he faced no punishment for what he did to his daughter. So the reason, that's your background. Why am I bringing all this up? Because this week, the Associated Press published one hell of a story. And let me share with you just the headline. Recordings show how the Mormon Church protects itself from child abuse claims. And this is written by Michael Resendez and Jason Deeren of the Associated Press. Michael Resendez, of course, is a longtime reporter when it comes to abuse in church. He's one of the spotlight guys who went after the Catholic Church in Boston decades ago. So you know these are solid reporters. But here's basically what this story is about. One of the things that we did not know before this week about that whole story, because everything I just told you, that was public. We knew that story already, if you followed that story. What we did not know is that the lawyer for the Mormon Church actually went back to Chelsea and her mother later on. They had multiple meetings about all of this. And he said, the Mormon Church has told me I can give you $300,000. But there are a few things you have to do if you want the money. Number one, the lawyer said, I know you've been recording these meetings that we've been having, because they told him they were recording these meetings. And he said, that's fine. He said, I want you to destroy all the tapes. That was number one. Number two, you have to promise never to sue the Mormon Church about the fact that we're not helping you prosecute your dad. Number three, you have to pretend this conversation right here where we're handing you a giant bag of money, you have to just never tell anyone this happened. And so here's the thing. If you're in their position and the church offers you $300,000 to basically shut up about this thing where you may or may not even see justice, even if they cooperated, I understand why the family said, yeah, we'll take the money. So they did. And they fulfilled their end of the bargain there. But remember I said at the beginning that there was someone else in those meetings, their friend who was there kind of serving as Chelsea's advocate, just a friend figure because she's going through something very emotional. Well, guess what? That friend made his own recordings of their meetings, and he did not sign any sort of deal with the Mormon Church. And that dude gave his recordings to the Associated Press. And so now we have these recordings. And actually, there's one of them that I want to play for you here. This is an example. I wonder if you could hear this. Den, you can give me a thumbs up if you could hear this recording from the church here. This is one of the recordings.
Agree that we will not disclose that we've settled with you, and you will not disclose that you've settled with the church, other than your attorney or financial advisors, and they must maintain confidentiality as well.
Okay.
Second paragraph, I'll be interested in your response, but the recommendation is that you acknowledge that there's been some recordings made of all of our communications, and that you agree to destroy those recordings within 10 days of signing this. And I guess the reason why that is I've had my deposition taken before. And if your attorney wants to listen to it and take the right piece that mischaracterized what we were talking about for 25 minutes, and they would just want to take the statement that is 30 seconds or 20 seconds.
Take it out of context.
I don't have any way to defend whether or not it's going to be taken out of context or not. So that's why that's in there.
So that's just one example of the recording. And we know he's not taken out of context because the Associated Press has all those recordings. They could hear it in context. And that's how they were able to write this update. In fact, going into the meeting, the friend's name in that article, his name is Eric Alberti. And he said to the Associated Press, going into this meeting with Ridding, who's the lawyer for the Mormon Church, I felt like it would be very clear once everything's laid out that, look, this is not something that we want to cover up. This is something that we want to uncover for a number of reasons so that John, the dad, doesn't do this again, so that Chelsea can move forward. But in a statement, and obviously that's not what the church wanted to do. In a statement to the Associated Press, the church said, the abuse of a child or any other individual is inexcusable, and that the dad, John, following his excommunication, has not been readmitted to church membership. See, everyone, the Mormon Church did their job. They won't allow him to do religious services anymore. He's not allowed back in the building. He can just abuse people outside the building because the church doesn't care if he goes after other victims, you see. So you could tell why Eric, this buddy of Chelsea's, is like, oh, I have tapes. I've kept the tapes. And then he gives it to the Associated Press reporters. Like, this is the Mormon Church for you. They think kicking someone out of their club is the worst kind of punishment, but they won't do something that is well within their power to prevent an alleged sexual predator from striking again. Like, sexual abuse is inexcusable, they say, but they won't do the bare minimum to prevent sexual abuse. And here's the thing. The saddest thing about this is that the law is technically on the church's side. Because like I said, if you're a religious leader and you do act, and confession is a big deal in your religion, as it is in Mormonism, then you're shielded. You are not a mandatory reporter. So you don't have to tell the police about this stuff. And the church says you better not tell the police about this stuff because it was an act of confession. I think a few weeks ago, I mentioned that there was a similar case in Arizona where a woman now said that when I was a child, my dad abused me and my sisters. And this went to court. They said he confessed to these crimes. So like we have evidence of it. The judge said, I'm sorry, I can't do anything about that because he said it during confession. So I got to toss out your case. And because the church did not participate in that, and because they didn't, rat him out, that father abused even more kids in his own family. In this case, that's not what happened. But again, the church knows they can get away with all this stuff, and they're not interested in stopping sexual abuse. In fact, they tell Mormon bishops, which again are just random people, they tell Mormon bishops, hey, if someone confesses something to you and you're not sure what to do about it, call our customer service hotline. They have a hotline. It's called a helpline. And basically, it gets funneled to the church's lawyers, and they have like a one-page manual, and it says, don't do shit. That's what the manual says. Like, oh, you want help on what to do when the man confesses to murder or abuse? The answer is shut up. Don't bring the church into this. Don't tell the victim anything. Just tell them to talk to us so we can tell them you can't do anything. For what it's worth, the Associated Press did contact the bishop who who wasn't allowed to testify about all this. And this is fascinating. They actually got that guy on record too. And look at what he said. Reached by phone by the Associated Press, the bishop who heard the confession, last name Miller, refused to discuss details. It's clergy privilege, he said. If I say anything, John Goodrich, the dad, can sue me for millions of dollars. And the sad thing is, he's probably right. If he does go to the police, he could be sued for breaking that act of confession. At the same time, though, if you're the Mormon Church, think about this. They are sitting on top of a giant Scrooge McDuck money bin full of what, 100, 200 billion with a B dollars? A few $1,000,000 that they could be sued for trying to stop sexual abuse. That is pocket change to them. The Mormon Church could have said, you know what? We're going to break the seal of confession to make sure the abuse stops. And if you sue our guy over it and you won millions of dollars from him and we lose the case, we'll pay that because it's worth the cost of protecting our members. But that's not what the Mormon Church did. It's definitely not what the Mormon Church would do. They love their money more than they love their members. That's the sad thing about all this. They would rather let this woman suffer on her own than do anything to help her out. The Associated Press also mentioned 33 states have exemptions for clergy members to laws that require other professionals like teachers, doctors, therapists. They all have to report allegations of sexual abuse if they know about them. Clergy members are exempt from all that. And the thing is, maybe you say, because I did hear this criticism, why are you mad at the Mormon Church? They were just following the law. They literally could not go to the police or testify about something someone said in confession. And maybe that's true. But why is that law in place? It's because the Catholic Church and the Mormon Church and Jehovah's Witnesses, their people lobby politicians to make sure that law does not change. If all of those groups banded together and said, you know what, this law that protects us, it's not actually protecting our members, so we cannot stand behind it. We want you to change the law and say priests should be mandatory reporters as well if we hear about some crime taking place in an act of confession. If they did it, those laws would change. But they will never do that because they don't care about helping people. Their secrecy matters a lot more. I'll show you one last thing here. The Mormon Church did issue a public statement after this Associated Press article came out, and some of this was quoted in the piece, but this is on Twitter, Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. You know, the abuse of a child, anyone else is inexcusable, yada, yada, yada. You know, they don't actually believe this. Our hearts break for the survivor and survivors of abuse. Listen, you guys, we terminated the perpetrator's membership 8 years ago. Come on, we did our job here. He has not been readmitted to church membership ever since. Claims that he confessed to a bishop prior to 2015, which no one is arguing, are false. His communications are protected by the law. Yeah. Only the perpetrator could release the bishop from his obligation under the clergy penitent privilege, and he refused to do so. Let me say that again. Only the sexual abuser, the alleged abuser, the dad, could have said, you know what, I did confess to this crime, bishop, and I confessed it to you, and I'm saying to you, even though I said that in a confession, you are allowed to go public with it to make sure I get punished for that. And the guy who might go to jail because of that, he's like, yeah, no, I'm good. No, you keep that a secret, Mormon Church. And they're acting like, see, if he said we could punish him, we would do it. but he said we can't, so we got to keep it a secret, you guys. Just the dumbest public statement. How does the church have $200 million and they can't figure out how to do public relations at all? Like that glaring loophole that you can confess and we can't tell anyone about it. It is a loophole for abusers everywhere because obviously they don't have to confess to any of this stuff. They're doing it because it makes them feel better. It takes a burden off their own abusive chests. You know what I mean? So they get the benefit of going to confession saying, I did this horrible, horrible thing. It's so horrible. It's criminal. And then the priest or the bishop says, yeah, it's pretty bad. Well, here's the magic words you could say to make it all go away. And guess what? God loves you again. And the alleged abuser is like, thanks, God, for being on my side. Then they leave the confessional booth and find their next victim. The only person who benefits from this are the potential abusers. And the church doesn't want to do what it has the power to do to help the victims. They're not going to argue that the law needs to be changed because that would mean more accountability on their end, and they are not responsible people.